Hello, good evening and welcome to this live webinar titled New Perspectives in the Understanding and Management of Urticaria. Of course, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce the elite panel today evening. Before that, let me also try and introduce myself. My name is Sunil Jaju. I work as Vice President Cluster Head for Sun Dermatology. And it's a great pleasure to have you all here for this evening. And today's webinar is for about an hour or so. In this webinar, we are grateful to Dr. G. Nandakumar sir, who has agreed to moderate this session. I don't think I have any authority to introduce him, but some few points for all of us. Sir has been clinical dermatologist for more than 28 years. He has been dermatopathologist for more than 22 years. He was National Coordinator IIDVL SIG Dermatopathology in 2013 to 2015 as well as 2020. He has many awards and accolades to his credit. He has been guest speaker at more than 100 national, international and state level conferences. He has shouldered many roles in state and national IIDVL society. We are grateful to Dr. Nandakumar sir for accepting our invite to be moderator for today's session. In the panel today, we have Dr. Ramkumar Ramamurthy sir from Chennai. He is a consultant dermatologist at Kanchi Child's Trust Hospital since 2002. He was member SIG Pediatric Dermatology, which is the upcoming field in the field of dermatology from 2016 to 2017. And he is also assistant editor, Indian Journal Pediatric Dermatology. We have Dr. Rakhi Nair, who's associate professor at Department of DNV at Medical College Kollam. She's a senior consultant dermatologist and a cosmetologist at Credit Hospital at Trivandrum. She has been faculty in state, national, and international conferences. She is also shouldering a role of treasurer in IIDVL Kerala, and she is a member of IIDVL PRP Task Force, SIG Aesthetics, IIDVL Practice Management Cell. We have Dr. Priya Ramanathan from Chennai. She is a consultant at Flair Cosmetic Plastic Surgery Center and Base Hospital. She has a special interest in clinical dermatology, aesthetic medicine, lasers. She has been academically oriented and contributed tremendously through her articles in journals, magazines, and newspapers. She is also reviewer for journal. It's a great pleasure and honor to have all of these panelists and moderator Nandakumar sir. And thank you very much. And I'm sure you will have 1 hour's scientific feat in front of you. And I would not come in the way of this discussion now. I request Dr. Nandakumar sir to take the session forward. Thank you very much and have a great evening ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good evening to you all. First of all, let me welcome my panelists and speakers of the day, Dr. Ramkumar Ramamurthy, Dr. Rakhi Nair, and Dr. Priya Ramanathan to this meeting. Before we proceed with the meeting proper, let me express my sincere thanks to Crosslands Division of Sun Pharma for giving us this opportunity. To be frank, when a topic for this webinar was being conceived, urticaria was discussed as a possible topic. My first reaction was that what is there to discuss more about urticaria? Because we have had many programs, many symposia, we have articles and publications on urticaria. So what newer aspect of urticaria can be discussed during a 1 hour webinar? That was my first task to decide upon. Fortunately, with mutual consultation among the 3 speakers, we have arrived at 3 novel, excellent aspects of urticaria, which I feel is very relevant in the day-to-day practice of dermatologists, which requires a lot of clarity with regards to the patient counseling as well as to drug therapy. And therefore, during the next 45 minutes or so, we will be having three topics related to urticaria, which will be presented by the speakers. And following which, we will have a panel discussion. And the participants are requested to post their queries also. We will be taking questions and queries from the participants. We will be having I hope we will be having a very fruitful discussion once the speakers present their topics or present their case or present their side, how they have viewed the three topics. So let me proceed with the first topic, which will be presented by Dr. Ramkumar Ramamurthy, my dear colleague and friend. He is talking on update on antihistamine use in infants and young children. The use of antihistamines in special clinical situations is a very hot topic. However much we discuss about it, there are still lacunae or gray areas which have to be covered upon. And I am sure that Dr. Ramkumar Ramamurthy will be throwing more light on this very important aspect of treatment of urticaria. Over to you, Dr. Ramkumar.
Thank you, sir, for the nice introduction. As you said, this is a really, there's a big lacunae in, so many in this pediatric use of antihistamines, especially. And let me try my best to provide some new information, because as you said, there have been many platforms in which urticaria has been discussed in the last quite 3 to 4 months. So let me, for the next 5 or 6 minutes, try to share some interesting information about some special situations where we need to have a different viewpoint in treating urticaria. Let me share my screen.
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Yeah.
The slideshow is on.
So, this is based upon what I have learned by working with pediatricians in a pediatric hospital for about nearly 2 decades. And, there is really no medicine like hope. I think especially when we are treating urticaria where you don't have a trigger in the majority of patients, I think we always expect something new, some new invention to carry us forward. Quite often the blood test, everything's where we do hoping that there is some treatable cause, would all turn out to be uninformative or not fruitful in the treatment of urticaria. So let me just a brief word about why off-label drug use is very common in children. Because most of the drugs we use, whether it's immunosuppressive or whether even most of the dermatological drugs we use it as only off-label in children. The main reason is research has not been done in children. Most of the work that has been research has been done in the adults and it's extrapolated to the pediatric population. So on an average, at least a decade time lag between approving a drug for an adult and the pediatric. I mean, this is not applicable for every drug. For example, Lulifin is approved within few years to use in children at 2 years old or so. I mean, it's a general rule. It takes at least a decade for pediatric drug approval. And so let me start the entire discussion with a question, with a discussion. This is a 15-day-old child with urticaria. I have to face this situation in the COVID, in June or July. So there was a 15-day-old child who had urticaria, and this child had sepsis. And I was called to give an opinion about this child. The child is entirely on the parenteral feeds, and you can very clearly see the bizarre articarial wheals which are seen throughout the body. Child had multiple issues. The child had undergone some surgery in the for duodenal obstruction. and it was on parental feeds. So one thing I could see was I could not make any decision about, because you are dealing with a 15-day-old child with urticaria, and the urticaria, to my understanding, it was only due to the sepsis or the internal infection, not for any other issues. Because and I followed the urticaria for 1 or 2 days, and it kept changing. And my whole issue here was whether to treat it or not. Should I really treat? Because this urticaria, there is no angioedema, there is no other respiratory. Child is already on so many support, life support, so many things are there. So should I treat this urticaria or not? And the question was, even if I have to treat the child, I have to give only an intravenous drug. That was the glitch here. The neonatologist told me that he cannot give anything orally for the child for the next few days, because surgery was done some 3 or 4 days back. So I have to give only an intravenous drug, and he was asking whether he can give intravenous chlorpheniramine maleate. So that made me once again go and look into the literature whether any antihistamine is approved in children less than 6 months. We always talk about older antihistamines because they are very safe. And I am also going to spend some 2-3 minutes later about on this issue, delve more on this. So we know that fexofenadine, levocetirizine, all of them are approved in cetirizine, levocetirizine, have all been approved in children over 6 months. Desloratadine more than 1 year, loratadine more than 2 years, rupatadine more than 2 years, Ebastine. But what about children less than 6 months? Are there any approval? So suppose I prescribe this drug off-label, suppose the parents question me or the doctors question me, what data do they have? So that was a big issue for me. And let me go through the literature. So there is no drug really with sufficient research data which is approved in children less than 6 months. So the only drug that has been used, this is based upon anecdote and based upon expert opinion. The only drug that has been used was chlorpheniramine maleate. The dose given was, this was mentioned in Archives of Disease Child Education 2015. There was in an article on antihistamine usage in children. So chlorpheniramine maleate 1 milligram twice a day was the only drug mentioned in that. Even that is also does not have sufficient data for that. And when you look at the this brain histamine receptor occupancy, which is a surrogate for the impact of the antihistamines on the brain, it was more than 50%. It was more than 50% for chlorpheniramine maleate, and more than 80% for parenteral chlorpheniramine maleate. That totally rules out the possibility of giving these drugs. So let me revise you. This is what, why is it that older antihistamines are not safe in children, though they are all, we do not have any drug in less than 6 months old child. The main reason is histamine is a mediator for wakefulness in children. You require histamine, dopamine, noradrenaline, and acetylcholine in almost equivalent proportions, and the entire brain has to be permeated by all these 4 neurotransmitters to keep us awake. So that is because this from the hypothalamus, histamine is released, and in the brainstem, histamine stimulates acetylcholine release. This acetylcholine activates the cerebral cortex. So now, when you are using an older antihistamine, you'll be blocking all the older antihistamines will get into the brain. Unlike the newer antihistamines, are pumped by the pre-glycoprotein transporters in the blood-brain barrier, so they will not reach out to the brain. So you take an antihistamine, within 1 to 3 hours, the blood level peaks up. So during that 1 to 3 hours period, the antihistamine will reach the brain. And it takes around 4 hours for the antihistamine to work in the skin. So normally it takes 3 to 4 hours for the antihistamine to work in the to saturate the skin. So in this 1 to 3 hours, the anticholinergic efforts, especially this is only for the older antihistamines, the anticholinergic efforts or mainly for the older antihistamines, and not much for the newer antihistamines. Of course, we do have some penetration by cetirizine. About 10% of the brain receptor occupancy can be occupied by the cetirizine. And in higher dosage, it may go up to 30% also. But this is much lesser for levocetirizine compared to cetirizine. But you take the older antihistamines, they reach the brain at a higher level. I mean, they remain in the brain for, and they also remain in the brain for a higher level. That is very interesting recent study by NI. And he found that half-life of antihistamines in the brain is 4 to 5 times higher for diphenhydramine. Diphenhydramine stays in the blood for about 10 hours. Imagine it's going to stay in the brain for 50 hours. And can you imagine that ketotifen eye drops can occupy 75% of brain receptors? Even an eye drop. Just look at it. So that is another big issue in a newborn or in an infant. Is the brain weight of a newborn is 10%. The brain mass is 10% the body weight, whereas in adolescent it is just 2%. So when you are giving a drug, more drug would reach the brain. And here an older antihistamine can easily pass through the blood-brain barrier because it is lipophilic. And not only that, even newer antihistamines are, loratadine is a lipophilic antihistamine, but it does not cross the brain because it is pumped out by the P-glycoprotein receptor. So cetirizine does not reach sufficiently the brain to occupy the receptors in the brain because it is, pumped up by the blood-brain barrier. But still, you have 10% brain occupancy for cetirizine. Okay, so you look at the half-life of the older antihistamines. It is 9 hours. And hydroxyzine. One thing I have noted is we commonly, many pediatricians, and we also commonly prescribe hydroxyzine in younger children, about 3-month-old child, a 4-month-old child, or 5-month-old child. Sometimes what I have noticed is you give hydroxyzine, and there may be some improvement in the urticaria. And after 1 or 2 days, they will come to you. The child is restless. I am not able to keep the child at home, and the child will be admitted. And the pediatrician will look for all the systemic causes, whether there is a systemic infection, and all the parameters may be normal. Once you reduce the dose of hydroxyzine, if it permits you, you will find that within 1 or 2 days, the hyperactivity of the child will go down. That is mainly because of the anticholinergic effect. Time and again, we have seen this. So, though we use older antihistamines in children less than 6 months, even we do not have data for that also. We do not have any data for using hydroxyzine in children less than 6 months. And the half-life of hydroxyzine is 20 hours. I told you, diphenhydramine can stay for 5 times longer in a brain. Though it has not been proved for hydroxyzine, we can presume that it can also stay for a higher time, at least longer than these 20 hours in the brain. So if at all we want to use hydroxyzine, we have to use it for once a day dose, not in thrice a day dose or 4 times a day as recommended by the most of the manufacturers and in the textbooks, because it has not been well studied. And quite often we overdose the children with antihistamines. These are all the ones I spoke about, this anticholinergic effect, excessive crying, disturbed sleep pattern, hyper excitability, drowsiness, and seizures are all very rare. And all those over-the-counter remedies for cough and cold, they have not been approved by the FDA. FDA issued a warning in 2002 that all the OTC remedies, like for example, Phenergan, its promethazine should never be used in children less than 2 years because it can cause fatal respiratory depression. So all the over-the-counter remedies, I am talking about even in USA, not approved for children less than 2 years. FDA issued a clear black box warning, and promethazine should not be used. What about usage in children 2 to 6 years? That is only by a prescription. If you are using an older antihistamine in children less than 6 years, it should be only by prescription. And another interesting thing that comes up here is not studied in children is the cardiac impact of the antihistamine. This prolongation of the QT interval, this off late, this received a lot of attention because we have the proposed impact of hydroxychloroquine on QT interval. So every one of us must have referred so many references to know more about this QT interval. So all the newer antihistamines have been found to be safe, but this is only on adults. The studies are done on adults, and the older antihistamines, especially diphenhydramine and hydroxyzine, even cyproheptadine also. So when we refer the book, we will often we are tempted to see this information that chlorpheniramine maleate is a milder anticholinergic compared to diphenhydramine and cyproheptadine. But as long as cardiac safety also, it is not proved in these studies have not been done. The doses given under diphenhydramine, cyproheptadine, promethazine, and hydroxyzine, all of them have been found to have prolonged QT interval. There is another question that is always for us. What about cetirizine and levocetirizine? Some persons may say that cetirizine is as good as levocetirizine. Why should you use a levocetirizine? Actually, if you look at it, cetirizine has got a longer half-life and it acts fast within 30 minutes compared to levocetirizine. But the brain receptor occupancy for cetirizine is somewhat more compared to levocetirizine. And 85% of the levocetirizine is not metabolized. That is because in children, we know that the liver size is bigger in child than in adult. That is why in cetirizine have to be given, and levocetirizine have to be given in frequent doses in children between 1 and 6 years of age. And there levocetirizine may have an advantage over cetirizine because 85% of levocetirizine is not metabolized. 65% of cetirizine is metabolized. So more in children, it is routed, this drug is routed through the liver. It may be more quickly metabolized because of the larger size of the liver. So the message here is, if you want to use cetirizine, use it twice a day in children, younger children, that is 1 to 6 year old. And it is approved for children more than 6 years. I mean, I have already told you that liver of the child is occupies greater mass percentage of the total body weight compared to the adult, and renal clearance is faster in children. These are the two issues. And histamine receptor occupancy, cetirizine and levocetirizine have got an advantage that it stays for a longer time. Fexofenadine 2 has got a longer duration of action in children. It is 18 hours in children compared to 11 to 14 hours in adult. What I have seen is using fexofenadine in less than 60 milligram in children does not work for urticaria. So at least 60 milligram, 5 ml twice a day. Less than that, it does not work in urticaria. Very rarely, I mean, maybe after control of the disease, also in acute urticaria, it might work. So any dose less than 60 milligram in children, this has been found in the study, in a study by Simmons et al. Also. So that, so maybe I feel that levocetirizine and cetirizine have got a better safety profile in children than in, compared to other drugs. So what about this new kid in the block, bilastine? One thing about bilastine, what I have seen is, it may be a very good drug for chronic urticaria, but in children, what I have found is it is not approved in children less than 20 kg of weight. Only children more than 20 kg of weight it is approved. And the second practical point I found out was the drug it interacts with the food, and the drug has to be given in empty stomach. And at least the drug and food has to be separated for at least an interval of 1 hour. And it's quite difficult to children because children frequently take feeds. So to keep a child without food, I mean, it's, even in a 6 or 7 year old child is quite difficult. And this is especially, this issue is very important because especially the first 4 days of treating a child, this food interaction plays a role. So you are treating a child with acute urticaria, I would suggest that bilastine is not, should be in the lower, the list of, recommended in the list of choice, your choice, because of the fact that the interaction with the food will stay for the first 4 days. So it may not reach sufficient concentration in the skin. Thank you, sir, for giving me an opportunity. Thanks to Sun Pharma for giving me an opportunity. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Ramkumar, for a very insightful lecture. You have touched upon very, very pertinent points with regards to use of antihistamines in children. We will be taking the discussion part after completion of all the three topics. Okay, right. Thank you very much once again. Shall we go to the next topic that is to be presented by Dr. Aki Nair? She will be talking on assessment of severity, quality of life, and psychological comorbidities in chronic urticaria. Dr. Aki Nair.
Okay, sir. I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah,
sir?
it's fine.
Yes,
It's fine.
yes,
It
yes.
is on
Okay.
slideshow. Yeah.
Okay. Very warm good evening to all of you. As you all know that chronic urticaria is a very disturbing disorder that and it has got a lot of impact on our patients, both physical as well as psychological, as well as it affects the quality of life, and it has a lot of impact on the physician as well, because it's very difficult treating them. The definition of chronic urticaria goes as the recurrent wheals occurring for almost more than 2 times a week for consecutive 6 weeks. And there are innumerable causes, of which the commonest is chronic spontaneous or idiopathic urticaria. Now, I'll be dealing with a portion or a gray area which we generally do not discuss, that is the assessment of the severity, quality of life, and the psychological comorbidities associated with chronic urticaria. So going to my topic directly, the objective evaluation in urticaria, according to the guidelines by the European Allergology and Immunology, as well as the European Dermatology Federation, they recommend using a direct, well-established score like urticaria activity score, which evaluates the main disease characteristics like itch, presence, and number of wheals on a Likert type of symptom intensity scale, that is 0 to 3, with a total daily score ranging from 0 to 6. So this is very easy for using with the patients. So you assess them depending upon the number of wheals and the itching. So score 0 is no wheals or no itching, and score 1 is you have mild itching, mild wheals, that is less than 20 in one day, and the itching is mild, it's present but not disturbing. Then you have moderate, that is 2, that is 21 to 50 wheals in a day, and the itch is moderate, disturbing but not interfering with sleep or activity. Third, we have third scoring is intense or severe, that is more than 50 wheals in a day or large confluent areas of wheel. It can be intense or severe, and the itching interferes with sleep and activity. Now the scoring is 0 to 6, but usually it is better to take the score over 7 days, because as we all know, the symptoms and signs of the urticaria usually are very fluctuating. So if you take on a particular day, it is not very useful. So it is usually assessed over a week's time. So that is called urticaria activity score 7, that is UA 7. It is usually 0 to 42 when you add up for a week, and less than or equal to 6 shows well controlled, and 7 to 15 mild, 16 to 27 moderate, and 28 to 42 is severe. Now, next is the urticaria control test. This is a retrospective tool. It is used to rapidly and reliably assess the disease control. 4 simple questions are there. Patients answer each of these questions, and the points correspond to 0 to 4 per answer. So when you add up, you get a total score ranging from 0 to 60. And the cutoff for controlled urticaria is 12 points. That is, a score of less than 11 indicates insufficient disease control, whereas a score of 12 or more suggests adequate disease control. So this is how the test is, and the questions are: to what extent have you suffered from physical symptoms of urticaria, that is pruritus, wheals, and or swelling in the past 4 weeks? So it's retrospectively analyzed. And it's very easy for the patients to answer. How much has your quality of life been affected by the urticaria in the past 4 weeks? How often has the treatment of your urticaria not been sufficient to control the urticaria symptoms in the past 4 weeks? So it also, tries to gauge the usefulness of the treatment given. How well has your urticaria been under control overall in the past 4 weeks? Then coming to Urticaria Severity Score or USS, it is a mixed instrument consisting of 8 questions answered on a Likert type scale of 0 to 7 plus 1 question relating to location of the wheels. It combines degree of symptoms, quality of life measures relevant to chronic urticaria, and the amount of type of medication required to control the symptoms. So these questions are: over the past week, how uncomfortable or itchy has your skin been? And how many days over the past week did you have this hives or itch? On an average, how many hours did you have hives or itch each day? And what was the maximum number of hours your hives or itch lasted each day? So these are related to the characteristic of the hives. On an average, on which parts of your body were the hives or itch? On the worst day, on which parts of your body were the hives or itch seen? Then coming to the treatment questions, on average, how many pills did you take each day? And these relate to 2 of the treatment methods, that is antihistamines and prednisone or methylprednisolone. How many days did you have episodes of swelling over the past week? How many nights did your hives or itch interfere with sleeping? And did your skin interfere with work or school? Did your skin interfere with your social life? So this is a better severity score because it assesses quality of life as well as the symptoms as well as the response to the treatment. Then urticaria meter. In a busy practice, it's very difficult to assess severity of urticaria, or it may be difficult to make the patients, mark the questionnaire. So this meter enables us to assess the urticaria severity in minutes. You enter the wheel score and the pruritus score on the meter, and the score is displayed within minutes. So this has been devised by Dr. Godse, who's our president now of IADVL, urticaria meter. It has got different wheels, and then you just gauge it, and you can show the patient the improvement. So the patient also feels happy because many a times the urticaria patients come and complain that they're not getting any improvement with the treatment. So if you're able to show them that their severity has reduced according to the assessment, they are at peace, and I feel that gives a better control of the disease as well. Now, impaired physical and emotional functioning. Chronic urticaria affects a wide range of daily activities from personal care to sleep, rest, work performance, and social relationships. Physical and emotional functioning is subjectively impaired beyond the severity of the actual disease symptoms. Thus, a proper assessment of health-related quality of life or using appropriate tools is very important. Now, definition of quality of life is the functional effect of a medical condition and or its consequent therapy upon a patient from the patient's perspective. So there are different tools to measure quality of life. We have generic questionnaires, we have specific skin disease questionnaires, and specific chronic urticaria questionnaires. Now, the generic questionnaires are questionnaires which are made for almost all diseases. You can use them. Specific skin disease questionnaires are for the skin disease of them. The commonest is the Dermatology Quality of Life Index and the Skindex 29. Specific chronic urticaria questionnaires are Chronic Urticaria and Quality of Life questionnaire, that is CUQ2OL, and the Urticaria Severity Score, which I have mentioned earlier. Now, evaluating QOL by using generic instruments. There have been studies which showed that short form 36 health survey, one of the generic forms were used, which consists of 36 questions covering 8 domains grouped into 2 main areas, that is the physical and mental well-being of the patient. There were studies which compared chronic urticaria with patients with allergic respiratory disease, and the results indicated that daily life was more affected in patients with chronic urticaria than in patients with rhinitis and or asthma. Now, this is a table showing the different studies which had been done using, on the left side, you can see that the study tools which were used for World Health Organization Quality of Life Assessment, that also showed that chronic urticaria had lower scores in physical and mental subdomains. Then medical outcomes survey short form, which I mentioned earlier, that is SF36, that also showed lower scores in all domains in chronic urticaria patients. Skindex 29 also showed lower scores in all domains. Then comparing with respiratory allergies, chronic urticaria patients had greater sleep disturbance, greater disruption of work activity, and worse general physical and mental functioning. Then Dermatology Life Quality Index tool was used in 170 patients that also showed all forms of urticaria affected the quality of life. Then when we compared when a study was done comparing 142 patients with chronic urticaria and with life-threatening heart disease using the Nottingham Health Profile, it showed similar quality of life scores in both these groups. So evaluating quality of life by specific skin disease instruments, that is DLQI, 10 questions subdivided into 6 domains: symptoms and feelings, daily activities, leisure, work, school, personal relationships, and treatment. Each question is scored on a scale of 0 to 3, and it ranges from 0, not at all, to 3, which is very much. And maximum score is 30 and minimum is 0. As the score goes up, the more is the debility. Now, evaluating using specific chronic urticaria tools, that is the CUQ2OL. In this, there are 23 questions, and it's grouped into 6 quality of life categories, that is itch, swelling, activities, sleep, limitations, and looks. Now, when you compare the urticaria severity scoring versus the DLQI, there are different studies. It showed that urticaria severity scoring was more sensitive in detecting symptom improvement. So it can be, it was shown that the mean scores from baseline to follow-up for the USS was 9.95 compared to 2.25 with DLQI. So it says that USS is, that is the urticaria severity score is more sensitive than DLQI for quantifying the severity, and it may be more applicable in the evaluation of urticaria specific treatment efficacy. Now, limitations of all these tools are: one, there is a lack of specific tools to evaluate chronic urticaria in children and adolescents or in inducible or physical urticaria. Lack of evaluation of the impact of the doctor or patient relationship during the course of the disease. Lack of an estimation of minimal important difference for quality of life tools in chronic urticaria to be able to categorize the disease as mild, moderate, or severe. Then there is no analysis of the relationship between the course of the disease and psychological variables. There is lack of cross-validation of tools to measure quality of life in chronic urticaria in various languages and cultures throughout the world. Now, coming to the third aspect of my talk, that is the psychiatric comorbidity in chronic urticaria. Published evidence suggests a clear association between chronic urticaria and psychiatric disorders, and the most common ones are depression and anxiety. Urticaria experts must therefore, they should approach the chronic urticaria patients in the context of a biopsychosocial model. Now, prevalence of psychiatric comorbidity is found to be 31.61%. However, whether the psychiatric disorders are a potential cause or a consequence of this urticaria remains to be resolved as yet. Now, the associated psychiatric disorders in the order of increase to decreasing order are sleep-wake disorders. This is again, more. It is superseded by using antihistamines, which again, distort the sleep of the patient and disturbs their sleep cycle. Anxiety disorders next, and then mood disorders, trauma and stress-related disorders, somatic symptom and related disorders, obsessive-compulsive and related disorders, and substance-related and addictive disorders. Now, what is the probable pathomechanism in this? There is interaction between the immune and the CNS system. There is a brain-stem connection. So the local neuro Now, how to manage? If the level of stress is reduced, the impact on the whole chain of biological mechanisms can also be reduced. So, urticaria patients, there are case reports in whom they were treated with anti-allergic as well as psychotropic drugs like benzodiazepines and antidepressants and psychotherapy. All these cases showed improvement. So, a multidisciplinary approach is what is required in urticaria patients, especially chronic urticaria patients who are not showing much improvement on our conventional treatment. So psychotropic therapy may affect chronic urticaria control. Now, this is a very interesting study which showed the improving psychological status of omalizumab in chronic urticaria. Now, omalizumab is a monoclonal antibody that blocks the binding of free IgE to its receptor on the surface of the effector cells, that is the mast cells in the basophils. So there were 30 patients over 18 years of age, 10 males and 20 females. 15 were affected by moderate to severe CSU, chronic urticaria, as defined by earlier said urticaria activity score more than 28, that is over a week. And they were treated with omalizumab. There were 15 subjects enrolled as control group. Now, assessment was done by hospital anxiety and depression scale, CRP, ESR, at baseline and after 6 months. Now, this is a table which showed that anxiety score and the depression score had almost become normal at the end of 6 months. So, omalizumab not only improves urticaria, but it can also improve the stress factor part or the mental comorbidity associated with it. Now, this is a case report which I want to present so as to illustrate the effect of psychotherapy in cases of chronic urticaria. A 32-year-old female with no prior history of skin or psychiatric disorders started having recurring thoughts of a traumatic incident that produced severe anxiety, followed by increased heart rate, muscle tension, dizziness, and urticaria rash and lividity of the skin on the torso, arms, and neck area in 3 months duration. Her sleep was disturbed with recurring episodes of night terrors, irritability, depressed mood, and intense feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness. Ability to function in everyday tasks was compromised. Skin condition caused her to feel more anxiety, which in turn worsened the symptoms she had experienced. Urticaria seemed to be connected to her mental state as it dramatically flared up within 10 seconds of being anxious. Dermatology consultation was followed by psychiatrist's opinion on the diagnosis and treatment for her condition. There was no family history of any mental illness or skin diseases. So investigations were done. That is the GAD-7 test score, that is a score for anxiety. It correlated to severe anxiety. The HAMD test score, that is a test, Hamilton Depression Test score for depression showed mild depression. Blood test showed no abnormalities. The common allergy testing battery report came back as negative. Thereby, the diagnosis was generalized anxiety disorder with post-traumatic stress disorder. Dermatological diagnosis was chronic spontaneous urticaria. Treatment, the patient refused proposed treatment for her anxiety disorder in the form and depression disorder in the form of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So she was trying to conceive with her partner. So the treatment consisted only of psychotherapeutic intervention. The intervention given was rational emotive behavioral therapy. That is analysis of the dysfunctional and irrational beliefs, empirical and functional dispute, formation of healthy rational beliefs, discovering and refuting cognitive distortions, rational emotive imaginations, behavioral exercises, home assignments to reinforce new insights, and bibliotherapy. So once weekly for 4 weeks, she was given treatment, and at the her scoring system by around 4 months, she had changed to around mild anxiety. Her urticaria, flare-ups of urticaria continued over the first month in situations when she got anxious, but during the last month of the treatment, the patient did not have a single flare-up of urticaria, and her level of life function and efficacy returned to normal. So comorbid mental condition in patients with CSU is well documented. Brief emotional arousal induced flare-ups can worsen both mental and skin condition. Psychological trauma and stressful life events often precede the development of chronic spontaneous urticaria. So history taking is very important. Stress causes neurogenic inflammation, release of neuropeptides, especially substance P in the skin, which activates muscles and their response to IgE antibodies. It lowers the threshold for urticaria and affects the severity of the disease. And stress reactions also release hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. Thereby, if you reduce the stress, there will be lowering of the morning cortisol concentration and urticaria symptoms. Effectiveness of psychotherapy is well documented when dealing with psychological stress and conditions such as generalized anxiety disorder. The effectiveness of psychotherapy is at par with the effects of psychotropic medication according to many studies. However, further studies are required to bring it forth in the recommendations. Psychotherapy is known to modulate stress responses and hence lower the chronic spontaneous urticaria flare-ups. To conclude, severity scores are an important tool in chronic urticaria. They help to assess the patient as well as to show the patient that their symptoms are reducing and they are getting improvement over days, or else you tend to, the patient forces you to keep changing or updosing. So if you can show the patient a valid tool by which their severity has decreased, it's easier to convince the patient, and their stress also gets relieved, as well as our stress gets relieved. It helps to assess disease severity and the effect of the treatment. Can be also used for trials. Detailed history and counseling is very important in case of patients with urticaria, especially you have to ask related to the stress. Stress can either precede, it can coexist, or it can follow urticaria. So it's very mandatory to address the stress part of urticaria. Psychotherapy should be considered while planning treatment options for patients with chronic urticaria. Therefore, a multidisciplinary approach is what is required in patients with chronic spontaneous urticaria who are not responding so well to our conventional modes of therapy. So thank you so much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Raki, for a wonderful lecture. I'm sure
Thank
that
you,
there
sir.
will be lot of queries and lot of clarifications required on many aspects of your talk. So we will be taking the questions, as I said earlier, at the end of all the once all the speakers are completing their topic. Yeah? So please
Okay,
stay
sir.
on with the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So we go to the next topic to be presented by Dr. Priya Ramanathan on systemic diseases and urticaria, precise association or coincidence. Over to Dr. Priya Ramanathan.
I think Dr. Raki has to stop share screen so that I can upload my slide. Yeah. Yeah. Is it visible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would thank the previous two speakers for their wonderful presentation, short and crisp and very informative. And I have a lot of learnings from those two topics today. So with this, I would like to start the topic on systemic diseases and chronic urticaria, whether there is a precise association between the two, or it is a mere coincidence or anecdotes, just reported anecdotes. Urticaria can be acute or chronic. The topic of discussion today is going to be chronic urticaria. This has already been defined as chronic is something which is more than 6 weeks, which lasts for more than 6 weeks. Just to go through in order, acute urticaria, just to revise the etiology, the common causes are more often infectious when it is short duration, or it can be allergic mediated by type 1 hypersensitivity, or it can be a non-allergic phenomena when there is a direct histamine release from the mast cells, which is triggered by either a diet or any other pseudo-allergen like drug, or idiopathic when we do not know the cause. Now we come to today's topic of chronic urticaria. Most of the time, if you see, we label it as idiopathic. Many a times we do not know the cause of urticaria. So it comprises about 55% of the total urticaria cases, chronic urticaria cases. Out of it, 45% is chronic autoimmune urticaria. Autoimmune urticaria is an entity in itself, and it is not to be confused with urticarial vasculitis. The other remaining, we also have some small portion is comprised of the non-allergic variant and the infectious cause, whether it is bowel infestations or parasites caused by H. pylori or candidiasis or chronic sepsis, which we will take up in the upcoming slides. In chronic urticaria, the allergic cause is pretty rare. And as I said before, physical and urticarial vasculitis is not considered here. Now, whether there is a possible systemic association with chronic idiopathic urticaria, though we label it as idiopathic, is there really any systemic association? So when I went into the literature, and though clinically we see cases, there have been reports of inflammatory bowel diseases in urticaria, hormone changes, and malignancy. These are the three areas which need to be explored when we think about chronic idiopathic urticaria. The first topic of inflammatory bowel disease, either Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, have both the inflammatory bowel diseases have extraintestinal manifestations like peripheral arthritis, uveitis, involvement of the hepatobiliary system. In case of skin, urticaria is one of the presentations, but more common presentations are erythema nodosum and pyoderma gangrenosum, and aphthous stomatitis, cheilitis, and pellagra may be due to nutritional deficiencies. We need to understand the etiopathogenesis. What is that triggers urticaria in inflammatory bowel disease? One of the hypotheses states that there is an abnormal mucosal T cell response in these patients, which disturbs the normal intestinal hemostasis. This in turn triggers a chronic inflammation leading to Th1, Th2, or the Th17 pathways, leading to cytokine release. And this cytokine release subsequently goes on and leads to intestinal and extraintestinal manifestations. Extraintestinal, right now, our discussion is pertaining to urticaria. The other hypothesis in inflammatory bowel disease is probably there is an influx of mononuclear cells, which are actually activated in the gut of these inflammatory disease patients, homing aberrantly to extraintestinal organs. There is a case report wherein a 64-year-old male patient presented with unexplained chronic urticaria for more than 6 months and reported a weight loss of 10 kgs in the previous year. There were no other gastrointestinal symptoms or fever, fatigue, arthralgia, atopy, or cancer. Investigations revealed raised total count, ESR, and CRP. The abdominal CT, which was done, revealed stenosis in the ileocecal junction. Biopsy revealed mixed cellular perivascular infiltration. The treatment of inflammatory bowel diseases was taken into consideration because they thought probably it's a Crohn's disease, which is involving the ileocecal junction leading to stenosis. And when this patient was treated for the same, he was relieved of his symptoms of urticaria. The inference from this case is it's probably worthwhile to investigate for inflammatory bowel diseases in cases of unexplained chronic urticaria. The next topic is hormone changes. Can hormone changes cause chronic urticaria? Now, this is pertaining to women during menopause. There are cases, few cases, though not many. The etiology is probably there's a decrease in estrogen, which can trigger an autoimmune response. And the few cases which have also been reported in pregnancy, though there are no proper hypotheses explained for the same. Malignancy and urticaria. Apart from cutaneous mastocytosis, which can present with brown maculopapules and urticaria, there is no proven association with other malignancies and urticaria, meaning whether it is worthwhile investigating for a malignancy when there is an unexplained case of urticaria, there is no proven association. However, patients on treatment of chronic urticaria should be followed up with for hematological malignancies, especially biologicals. There are two contradictory journal reports. One journal reports probably there can be a risk of association when they are treated with biologicals in the long run. And the other says there is no proper evidence to suggest that there is increased risk of cancer in CU or vice versa. Now we'll go to the topic whether infection can cause chronic urticaria. Apart from inflammatory bowel diseases, hormone changes, perhaps suspected malignancy. The next topic is whether infections can cause chronic urticaria, because infections are a common cause of acute urticaria. Especially Dr. Ramkumar had already told whether it's a sepsis which caused urticaria. Infections is one thing which we look into when we see a child of acute urticaria or any other patient. So bowel infections, H. pylori, or any other parasitic infestation. This is the topic that we are going to consider now. Chronic H. pylori gastritis affects 2/3 of the world's population and is one of the most common chronic inflammatory disorders of humans. Some studies have reported an association between chronic urticaria and H. pylori. Out of 100 patients in a test group, 91% responded to the eradication therapy to H. pylori, while 8.33% showed no response to the eradication therapy. Clinical follow-up of successfully treated patients of those of the 91% 3 months later revealed complete remission of urticaria in almost 54.5% cases, which is a significant percentage, partial remission in 18%, and no improvement in 27%. Now, what is the pathogenesis? How can H. pylori cause urticaria? It is thought that infection increases the permeability of the stomach lining, and this in turn increases the exposure of allergens, that is either the diet or pseudoallergens, preservatives, or drugs in the gastrointestinal tract. The second hypothesis states that probably these patients develop IgE antibodies specific to H. pylori, which in turn can cause histamine release. However, there are no confirmed evidence for the same. The third hypothesis says chronic infection triggers an immunological response through a mediator-driven factor in which non-specifically increases the sensitivity of cutaneous vasculature. The fourth is molecular mimicry, and this is the most accepted one right now. H. pylori and other infections, be it Streptococcus, Mycoplasma, pneumonia, or Borrelia, initiate an autoimmune response, which leads to the development of antibodies either to IgE or the IgE specific receptor, which in turn leads to the disorder. These antibodies can be detected in 1/3 of the patients of chronic idiopathic urticaria, and such patients also demonstrate positive ASST test, which is autologous serum skin test. The lab test, which if we suspect probably H. pylori is associated with the urticaria, probably we should go ahead and do an H. pylori antibody titer test, IgG. The specific test for the same are H. pylori stool antigen test and the urea breath test. So these have been reported. Practically, many of the labs are not doing these tests, and these are not available in many of the cities. The urea breath test is being performed by certain gastroenterologists who put the patients on H. pylori eradication therapy. The pre and the post results they compare, but it is not so very easily available. To conclude, I would say with H. pylori infections and chronic urticaria, H. pylori infection should be included as a diagnostic workup in patients with no response to habitual treatment for chronic urticaria or symptomatic gastrointestinal patients. Other infestations we should keep in mind: Candida, though it is very rare. Intestinal parasites, again, though rare in developed countries, can be thought of if there is a blood eosinophilia or if there is a history of recent travel to tropical and subtropical countries. Chronic dental infection need to be treated. The other infections that one need to have in mind is upper respiratory tract infection, urinary tract infection, HAV, HBV, infectious mononucleosis, or any other viral infection. There are case reports published regarding association of HBV infection and chronic urticaria and angioedema. Now, the second topic, here we complete the list of chronic idiopathic urticaria in terms of infections, infestations, and inflammatory bowel diseases, possible hormone changes, and malignancy association. The next important part is autoimmune urticaria, which is an entity by itself and comprises about 45% cases of chronic urticaria. The pathogenesis here is the body tends to form antibodies against its own healthy allergy cells, the mast cells. These antibodies are nothing but IgG antibodies, which are formed against the either IgE or the special receptor Fc epsilon Ri receptor of the IgE. These antibodies, once formed, lead to mast cell and basophil activation, triggering a cascade of histamine and pro-inflammatory mediator release, leading to wheel and flare reaction. The other pathway that they can go through is activation of the complement, and this in turn leading to activation of the mast cells. Now, associations, it is not that these diseases are associated with chronic urticaria. It is that the patient has urticaria and they are susceptible even to these diseases. So we have to look at it as association and not etiology. So one of it is autoimmune thyroiditis, then SLE, Sjogren's, rheumatoid, celiac disease, and IDDM. And there was one journal which stated that in diabetes, insulin-dependent diabetes, hypoglycemic stress releases corticotrophic hormone from the hypothalamus and the sympathetic neurons. And this is an immunomodulatory peptide which can cause peripheral vasodilatation and urticaria, which means probably we also need to keep this in mind in people who do not respond to any other line of management. Investigations that should be done in chronic autoimmune urticaria are definitely the count, since there may be an association with other autoimmune disorders. Whatever we suspect, accordingly we should do, like thyroid microsomal antibodies, TSH, ANA, dsDNA, RF factor, then anti-CCP, anti-Rho, anti-lab blood sugar, IgE, serum IgE. Now, the interesting part here is when you want to differentiate between an allergic urticaria and a non-allergic variant, because this is going to help us even in treatment to some extent, is serum IgE. If the serum IgE levels are reduced and the complement levels are raised, we can definitely think in terms of autoimmune urticaria, because serum IgE levels will actually be raised in allergic urticaria, while in autoimmune, the IgE is reduced. Basopenia is again, it is one of the investigations suggested, but it is not practical. Then AST test is positive, and in these people, we also see raised biomarkers like ESR, C-reactive protein, and D-dimer. These are all inflammatory markers which are raised in patients with autoimmune urticaria. A possible association with vitamin D deficiency has also been suggested. Then there is a test called donor basophil histamine release assay, which is again not easily available in our country, is pretty expensive. It is a flow cytometry test wherein the sera from the patient is taken and incubated with donor basophils, which is available in the banks. And then if they are positive for autoimmune urticaria, a CD63 marker increases in those basophils, which is picked up by the radioisotope. If that happens, it confirms the diagnosis of chronic autoimmune urticaria. Probably if this test becomes available, and if we suspect a chronic autoimmune urticaria in patients and we go ahead and do this test, it can help us to confirm the diagnosis, and we can perhaps use biologicals or treat the patient accordingly to give them significant relief. After autoimmune urticaria, the other investigations, apart from the investigations which I read out earlier, the other investigations which should be done in chronic urticaria is urine routine, H. pylori antibody test, inflammatory bowel disease investigation if you suspect, test pertaining to gut infections, and test for allergic urticaria. Treatment of chronic urticaria is, it's known to all of us. It is antihistaminics, steroids, doxepin, cyclosporin, and other immunomodulators, methotrexate, cytotoxic drugs, plasmapheresis, IV immunoglobulins, and biologicals. I totally agree with Dr. Rakhi that one has to have a multimodal approach and multidisciplinary approach. I keep my multidisciplinary approach to chronic urticaria patients very simple. I say, we have to do AMC with the date, which is annual maintenance contract. So AMC is avoid triggering factors, M is medication, C is calm the skin with emollients and calamine, C for comfortable clothes, D, check for vitamin D deficiency, worth the trial to treat them with vitamin D deficiency and see if they improve. Think about alternative therapy if they want counseling, if there is something else that needs to be done, other systemic involvement, and emotions, control emotions. The patient needs to control emotion. We need to comfort them and give them psychotherapy as well. To conclude this topic of systemic diseases and chronic urticaria, I would put forth as chronic urticaria has variable unidentified causes than merely being labeled as idiopathic. Chronic autoimmune urticaria is a disease by itself, which constitutes 45% of the cases. Inflammatory bowel diseases and H. pylori infections can have a significant association in chronic urticaria, and investigations should be done in non-responding unexplained cases of chronic urticaria. Hormonal changes contribute to only a small fraction of the cases, and the association with malignancy is unproven. Atopy and pseudoallergens have their own place. Occult chronic infections should be treated if you suspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Priya Ramanathan. The statement that you made that we know the treatment of urticaria is very, very pertinent. Yes, all of us know the treatment of urticaria, but there are so many lacunae and so many gray areas in the treatment of chronic urticaria. Even the senior most dermatologist would find many points to be clarified with regards to treatment of an individual patient in a particular clinical situation. Please, Dr. Ramkumar and Dr. Akinayar, please join back with your video. We will go to the discussion. We have around 10 to 15 minutes for our discussion. We'll first take the topic presented by Dr. Ramkumar Ramamurthy. I'm sure that there are a lot of queries from participants also. We'll be trying to cover as many as possible. Um, Only thing with the topic presented by Dr. Ramkumar, the queries do not confine to the treatment of urticaria in children alone. There are many general questions also. With your permission, I will be taking up those questions also as the time permits. But to start off with the discussion, Dr. Ramkumar, do we have to keep in mind any particular aspect when we treat children with urticaria with antihistamines with regards to drug interactions? Some of the common drugs that are used in children, do they interact with the antihistamines? Any particular points that you would like to mention with regard to drug interaction in children on treatment with antihistamines?
Overall, drug interactions are not that much common in children. I mean, generally, like as you see in adult, but generally, some of the antihistamines, these older antihistamines, most of them are. If you, I think, when you talk about drug interactions, you always talk about cytochromes in the liver. And when you are using a newer antihistamine, interesting thing is 65% of cetirizine is not metabolized. 85% of levocetirizine is not at all metabolized, and 95% of fexofenadine is not at all metabolized. It just comes out through the biliary tract. So, unless like only when you are using a drug like a mesolastin, or you are using a drug like loratadine is extensively metabolized. Or when you are using a drug like rupatadine and ebastin, all this rupatadine, ebastin, mesolastin, they are metabolized by cytochrome 3A4. So you are using an itraconazole or some of the, especially itraconazole or erythromycin. I think it's not very commonly used nowadays. And these, it can block the metabolism of these drugs. That is a very rare situation in children. So, and you're using an older antihistamine. The cytochrome 2D6 is one that is metabolizing diphenhydramine and chlorpheniramine. You have to be careful about using fluconazole. Fluconazole, when you are using a daily dose, for example, you are treating a candidiasis, candidiasis with a daily dose. In that situation, you have to be careful. The child is taking an older antihistamine. I would suggest you to use a newer antihistamine, because some of the children may be already given older antihistamine with a pediatrician. So, especially diphenhydramine, cyproheptadine, and also the cough syrup dextromethorphan. Commonly, they come as a cough time. So, otherwise, I think more than drug interaction, it's better always to take fexofenadine in empty stomach and loratadine without food. So, these are all the things which are more important than drug interactions.
Very important points. I mean, from my clinical observation, what is your take on, I mean, the query, do children need a higher dose of antihistamines compared to adults to control urticaria?
You mean, are you asking about updosing of the antihistamine?
Yes.
Actually, if you ask me the data, it is not well studied. But we do use updosing. I have used updosing of, especially cetirizine, I have updosed in children, and especially older children, not in younger children. For a certain period of time.
Up to what dosage have you given?
I have given 2 to 3 times. I have not given 4 times. I have given triple the dose of cetirizine and levocetirizine. I have given levocetirizine. I have given. Rather, I have already told you, levocetirizine has got lesser brain penetration than cetirizine. But at a higher level, there may be. So I have gone up to 2 to 3 times, because most of the chronic urticaria in children, especially in Chennai, during May and June, when the humidity level goes up and it is very hot, this urticaria will flare up. Most of the urticaria in children are physical urticaria, most of the time, and dermographism, physical urticaria, and they may be triggered by intercurrent viral infections in between. So some cases, for a short period of time, updosing really helps, because otherwise you will end up putting every children on immunomodulators.
Yes, yes, very well said. One query from Dr. Akash Kailesh Selvam. what is the advantage of H2 over H1 antihistamines in resistant case of urticaria?
H2 antihistamines, of course, though they are, it's not mentioned in the high guidelines, it does have a role. Actually, H2 antihistamines, you should be careful about avoiding this this proton pump inhibitors. Ranitidine may have a role for a short period of time, but these proton pump inhibitors should be avoided because quite often you will, if you are going to updose the drug, especially some of the drugs may have this cardiac action, the cardiac this QT interval prolongation can be worsened by the hypomagnesemia that can be produced with the proton pump inhibitors. Whereas that is not the thing with ranitidine or this thing. And of late, ranitidine has been found to have action on the antigen presenting cells also. Though these are all not very well, coming up to limelight. It may have a role in atopic dermatitis also in some children. And only 10% of the skin receptors, 20% of the skin receptors are H2 receptors. Most of them are H1. So it may help. But in my practice, really it has not been very useful. There may be some marginal improvement.
Okay, thank you. Another aspect, you have managed a child with acute urticaria. Is there a role for a maintenance treatment? Does the child require to be kept on a maintenance treatment? This is a query from Dr. Vinuta.
Actually, that you can decide while you are following up an acute urticaria. Acute urticaria in the first 3 or 4 days will be very severe. And after that, the severity will come down as you go on. Suppose you are giving a 10 ml of 5 ml of levocetirizine or 10 ml. After 2 weeks or so, you might reduce the level of levocetirizine and the severity will come down. Whereas so it abates by about 8 weeks or so, 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 weeks, depending upon the individual cases, whether you find out a trigger or not. Whereas chronic urticaria, the severity will increase. So for them only, you are going to talk about maintenance dose. Unless you have got intermittent acute urticaria, where you have investigated chronic intermittent urticaria, those cases, sometimes you may give a maintenance dose anticipating in a urticaria after URTA. In chronic intermittent urticaria, acute urticaria, I think there is no need for a maintenance dose. You have to gradually taper over the period of 4 to 6 weeks by simple questionnaire and what you decide in your examination.
Patient with chronic idiopathic urticaria on omalizumab, do they require antihistamines in between the omalizumab?
Sir, I have not experienced with omalizumab. I think others can, or you can answer.
Dr. Aki, have you used omalizumab?
I have not, sir.
What about Dr. Priya?
Well, I do not have any personal experience with omalizumab, but what they generally combine antihistaminics with omalizumab if the patient is symptomatic. It is SOS. And they also combined steroids with omalizumab. So there are case reports which are being where you use steroids as well as omalizumab. But personally, I do not have any experience.
I think one valid point could be, sir, your omalizumab is not going to cure urticaria. So even when you are using it, it is going to take a certain period of time to work for urticaria, and there's going to be a time when you are going to fall back on antihistamines rather than abruptly stopping it. So I think it makes good sense to use an antihistamine along with omalizumab also.
Yeah, even I feel that the patient has to be on antihistamines in between the doses of omalizumab. What about cyclosporin? In fact, Professor Janaki from Chennai has raised the point. What is the role of cyclosporin? Ramkumar, do you use cyclosporin?
Yes, sir. Cyclosporin I have used. Cyclosporin, one thing about cyclosporin is at least we should have 3 milligram or more for good effect on the urticaria. And if children are obese children, I find it very difficult, sir, because you have to like 60, 70-year-old, 70 kg and bulky children, and you have to give around 150 or 200 milligram. and lean children and all, of course, cyclosporin weight is dosage is not dependent upon the actual weight. It is dependent only on the lean weight. I mean, lean body mass. But still, this there may be other issues like lipid levels might shoot up and other those issues. But really works. It definitely works for children with severe urticaria. After double dosing of levocetirizine, it does not work. I do not give it for more than 4 months, 3 or 4 months. I try to maximum 5, 6 months. I try to taper off, and it does help children.
Dr. Soundarya from Chennai, a very important question. Which antihistamine is safe in a patient with seizure disorder?
I think we should, I would say fexofenadine, because minimal brain penetration. Histamine is an anticonvulsant. So it will block the convulsive activity in the brain. So you have to choose for an minimally brain permeating antihistamine like a fexofenadine or this bilastine. These two have got a very minimal penetration. And I also heard about mesolastine. Mesolastine is the proportional impairment ratio is very less for mesolastine, but I have not used it. So these fexofenadine and that they should be given the first choice. I always use in children also. I use only fexofenadine, a child with seizure. I never risk using other
The best question for the evening. All three of you have to answer. Starting from Dr. Ramkumar, how long we can give antihistamines for chronic urticaria? Dr. Birdie Jose from Thrissur.
I think antihistamines are one of the safest drugs. And when you're talking about newer antihistamine like levocetirizine or cetirizine, they have been studied for years and years. You can say we know almost everything about cetirizine or levocetirizine. And cetirizine, you can 6 times higher dose you give also, it does not have an impact on the heart, and it is not metabolized. And it is, if for long, you can give it for years also, 5 years, longer than 10 years also. Same thing about fexofenadine. I do not know much about this bilastine. Even loratadine also, many people have used it for years and it's quite safe.
Bilastine syrup is available now?
Yes, sir, available. It is available as 4 ml 10 mg. And there is a Meltab also available. One company brings it, our Sun Pharma brings Meltab. And I think if I'm permitted to use the these proprietary names, Gracewell has brought in this syrup form. It is available.
Okay. Dr. Aki, how long have you, the maximum duration you have put a patient on antihistamine? Dr. Aki, are you there? She's not there. Dr. Priya, can you answer the question?
As Dr. Ramkumar said, the safety profile of levocetirizine is pretty high, cetirizine, fexofenadine. So in my practice, when the patient comes with chronic urticaria, my actually personal choice is even to combine montelukast along with it, montelukast and levocetirizine. And when we use that, I maybe the duration of dosaging is I follow the tapering dose. Initially, I give them 1 tablet at nighttime for say a month, and then make it to alternate days, and then weekly twice, and then stop it. From a montelukast levocetirizine combination, I may even shift to a plain levocetirizine the 2nd or 3rd month, depending upon the improvement. If the patient is responding favorably, in good responsive patients, I don't think I've treated anybody for more than 4 to 6 months, because most of them have either responded or they have changed their doctor, probably. And in my practice, I have treated maximum up to 6 months, and this sometimes they come up with flare the next year and other stuff. So I haven't used anything more than 6 years, and I have only tried mini pulse therapy with steroids, and I do not have any personal experience with biologicals, though I would like to hear it from others on how it would be good to use biologicals, whether it's going to be useful.
While on the topic, when do you decide to investigate the patient for any systemic association?
Okay, see, whenever the patient comes, it is most of the times, it is a chronic urticaria more than 6 weeks. So the very first time when they come and I try to find out whether they have already investigated themselves for the allergy panel, because a complete count ENT dental checkup, I think most of them have finished, but I also try to figure out whether they have been investigated for autoimmune disorders. So history helps a lot here to me. So I ask them about the autoimmune disorders. I figure out if there is a thyroid status, if there is a vitamin D deficiency, any autoimmune disorder symptom. Then gastrointestinal symptoms, yes, because of late I'm seeing some cases of inflammatory bowel diseases and urticaria. And when I've referred to my gastroenterologist colleagues, the symptoms have definitely reduced in terms of urticaria. And that is why I took up this topic also, to bring in that chronic inflammatory diseases, especially inflammatory bowel disorders, can have a role in urticaria. That's one. And H. pylori antibodies, I think I have been doing it for quite some time, and I put them on proton pump inhibitors. And sometimes when they do, because these patients invariably have gastritis. I mean, if I am thinking about investigating them for an H. pylori antibody, which is not considered very significant because most of us are infected with it. So I definitely inquire about the history of reflux diseases. If yes, I investigate them for the same, or I wait for some time. If the patient is not responding, even if they are asymptomatic, I do the test for H. pylori antibodies.
So, based on a detailed history taking and relevant clinical signs and symptoms, you decide on what investigations to embark upon.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Depending on
So it has to be tailor made for the patient. You cannot sort of generalize and go about a battery of investigation, isn't
correct.
it?
Absolutely.
Um, See, in practice, we see many, as you showed in one of your slides, an association between thyroid disease and chronic idiopathic urticaria. May not be an etiological one, but we do find that when the patient's thyroid status improves or the thyroid antibody status improves, there is a concomitant improvement vis-a-vis the chronic idiopathic urticaria also.
Yes.
So can we just say that it is only an association, or does it the thyroid problem has got an etiological aspect to the patient developing chronic urticaria?
Okay, the thyroid aspect is when it is an autoimmune thyroiditis. It is an individual susceptibility of a person to develop auto antibodies against the thyroid antigen. The same person has also the susceptibility to form autoimmune antibodies against the IgE receptor, the special receptor, or the IgE. So these are two independent factors. As I said, chronic autoimmune urticaria is an entity by itself. It's not that other autoimmune diseases are causing the problem. It's an entity by itself, and these two can coexist. So it is worthwhile investigating for both, because if you have chronic urticaria and you also investigate for, say, ANA and other stuff, we can always see some titers in some patients, which means the patient is prone for autoimmunity. And once it is autoimmunity, it is also, if you're using monoclonal antibodies, if the patient, if it is that severe, you can always titrate your treatment accordingly. That is one. And we cannot, mere association in the sense, I would say, because the patient can form antibodies against your own allergies, the patient also forms antibodies either to as a rheumatoid factor or a thyroid antigen or any other part of the body, any other cell can be targeted. As far as thyroid TSH, in fact, patients who have hypothyroidism, which is different, probably it is a dry skin and it is more of physical urticaria, the increased susceptibility of the dryness, which exposes them to allergens. So that is a different entity where there is no question of autoimmunity coming up. It is because more towards a physical thing and the patient having a sensitive skin in terms of dryness.
Have you observed any association with dyslipidemia and reduced vitamin D and chronic idiopathic urticaria?
Dyslipidemia, not really, or probably I've not thought about it, and no idea on that. And what was the other part?
Reduced vitamin D3.
Reduced vitamin D3, I think most of the patients are deficient in vitamin D. So how far we can go and say vitamin D deficiency is responsible to urticaria, I'm not clear on that, because I think anybody who's investigated, definitely they are deficient. So I don't think we can blame on vitamin D, but vitamin D seems to play a very significant role in most of the ailments. So I would suggest if they are deficient, we supplement them with vitamin D.
Raki, Dr.
Yes,
Raki,
sir.
dyslipidemia and chronic urticaria. Do you have anything to offer? Dyslipidemia and
So
chronic urticaria.
I've not really come across any patients who have complaints of dyslipidemia associated with chronic urticaria. Like routine, sir, when we check also, I've not seen many patients with dyslipidemia actually, association as such.
Dr. Ramkumar, any
Sir,
comments?
recently there are a lot of works done on about metabolic syndrome and the chronic urticaria.
Yeah, that is the answer.
Metabolic syndrome is supposed to be more increased, prevalence in chronic urticaria. And metabolic syndrome is general overall population also it is increasing. So I do not know how far we can relate this with that. And coming, one more point about this thyroid and urticaria, I would like to raise. I think if you permit me, raise one more.
You can, please.
Point. Actually, it is taking up a different, it is studied from a different level now. See, what is causing urticaria is the IgE to the thyroid antigen. The thyroid peroxidase antigen or thyroid microsomal antigen, which we do in our lab, is an IgG antibody. But now chronic urticaria has been found to have a lot of what is called autoreactivity. Autoreactivity means reactivity to our own antigens. There are some 120 auto antigens detected in chronic urticaria by Maurer and his group and so many investigators. So it is the TPO, the IgE against TPO that causes degranulation of mast cells. That is why your omalizumab works in chronic urticaria. We are always talking about IgE in chronic urticaria, which is swapped up by the omalizumab. Where is IgE in chronic urticaria? This IgE is either produced against one of the two possible target is one is the TPO. Second one is single-stranded DNA. So when you get, you have to be very careful about measuring this. Now, this IgE to TPO, we don't have now. We don't have any facilities to do it. In future only we will be able to. So until we do this, we will not be able to give a full picture or viewpoint about the role of thyroid in urticaria. So it is not this TPO anti-IgG. It is the thyroid antigen and IgE produced against it. That is the cause for chronic urticaria in some patients, and single-stranded DNA is also another. Another one is interleukin 24. So very interesting new interleukin. Interleukin 24 is supposed to be another autoantigen. So other autoantigens are not very well clarified. Around 120 autoantigens have been found in chronic urticaria. As Dr. Priya said, it's an entity by itself.
Dr. Raki, with regards
Yes,
to
sir.
you mentioned about the quality of life factors in chronic urticaria. What is the, association or there is a query from Dr. Venkatesan from Chennai. How far a person's occupation play a role in development of chronic urticaria? Have you got any reference with regards to that?
So occupation plays a role, especially in case of physical urticarias, especially if you're sun exposed. So the solar urticarias are more so in those patients. So inducible urticarias are seen more commonly in patients, in relation to their occupation. And another thing I would like to relate to occupation is when we are treating patients also, occupation has a very important role to play, because there are patients who do night shifts. Like the drivers or operation staff, so the nurses who do night duty, so it is very difficult to give them a sedative antihistamine during their night duty. So in that case, occupation plays a very important role if he is a driver by occupation or a night staff. So we need to take that into account while tailoring their treatment protocol.
You mentioned about the stress bar anxiety induced urticaria, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So, in that situation, what do you actually advise? A combined treatment by dermatologist and psychiatrist? Or
So
you will
actually,
either-
Actually, studies show that we should first ask them to go for a psychotherapy or a psychological counseling, where because many a times we may not have time in our OP to completely try and bring out their facts, because and they'll find it very difficult, like until and unless they're comfortable, they'll not come out with their stressful situation, like the case with that what I presented also. It is after a lot of coaxing that in that case report it was that she's got married, but in the past she had a abuse by somebody, so she used to keep having recurrent thoughts of it. So if such history has to come out from the patient, we need to take a lot of time from our practice to do this. So it will be always good if we can have a good team work with our counseling, like psychologists as well as, and if that doesn't work, we can go to the next option of trying the psychotropic drug therapy, like anti-anxiety ones. Like I've seen many psychiatrists giving etisolam or escitalopram to patients in a small dose. Like initially it used to be giving Angsit or alprazolam, which many a times I've seen in the old prescriptions also, because it used to once the anxiety factor is relieved, like I said, the stress factor can either precede the urticaria, or it can be associated with the urticaria, or it can follow episodes of urticaria. So history taking and a combination multidisciplinary treatment is very important in such cases, and many studies show that it has relieved the urticaria.
You mentioned about an advantage of omalizumab.
Yes, sir.
Yes, can you just briefly elaborate on that point?
Yes, sir. So in that study, it has shown that there were patients who were put on omalizumab, and in them, when they have scored, the scoring system has been used for assessing their anxiety as well as depression scores, and it was shown to be on a higher level. So they were assessed by giving omalizumab, and then assessed after month 1 as at baseline as well as after 6 months. So when they saw all the scores, like in that table I was just mentioning about the anxiety and depression part, but in that the severity scorings were also considerably reduced. It was the p-value was significant. So it was significantly shown that with omalizumab, not only the severity scoring index is reduced, quality of life index was also improved, but along with that, the stress indices, that is the anxiety scoring and the depression scoring, was also almost completely normal after the use of omalizumab. Okay, so omalizumab have an advantage in such cases where stress plays a role in urticaria.
Oh, very, very important point. Thank you all. I think we are running out of time. One last question to, I think, Dr. Ramkumar. Does long-term antihistamines leads to increased body weight? Dr. Sunita Thomas from Martanda.
That is because of the impact on the serotonin receptors. Serotonin receptors, all the older antihistamines do cross the brain. They have an impact on the serotonin receptors. And as far as newer antihistamines are concerned, I mean, there is very sparse data. And I read in one review article years back that cetirizine also has got serotonin impact. Then when I met Dr. Martin Church and I asked him this question straight away in Chennai, and he said, no, that is at very higher doses, like 5 times or so, and it is it is not going to have any, because they are all the newer antihistamines. They work specifically on the H1 receptors. They do not work. They are selective for the H1 receptors. They cannot fit into. I mean, there is something common between histamines and other amines, but still they are very selective. So, and they work by a different mechanism, by a different portion of the receptors. They combine and prevent they block the impact of histamine. So, I think the urticaria chronic antihistamine associated overweight, I think it develops in due course. Maybe you have to investigate the patient for metabolic syndrome, and it may not be because of the antihistamine use. It may be because of the urticaria itself, because metabolic syndrome is now reported more commonly in chronic urticaria.
I think we will wind up our session today. We started with 15 minutes discussion. We have gone to 35 minutes. As I said at the beginning, we all know how to manage urticaria. We treat patients with urticaria in our day-to-day practice. but still there are so many points that needs clarity with regards to special situations like children, infants, pregnant women, lactating mothers, how to treat these patients with urticaria. There are many more questions which I couldn't take because of the paucity of time. Thank you, my dear panelists, for your wonderful, first of all, wonderful presentation, plus very informative discussion. And I sincerely thank all the participants for the questions which they raised. I hope our presentation and discussion was useful to you. Thank you very much. If there is nothing more to add, shall we take leave? Good night from me. Can we take leave of the meeting? Mr. Sunil Jaju, can we leave the meeting?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is Madan. So, thank you very much, doctor. In fact, 1st October, we observed World Urticaria Day. And in your strive to create more urticaria awareness, this webinar gave us an opportunity to join that momentum. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Nandakumar sir, Dr. Ramkumar sir, Dr. Priya madam, and Dr. Raki madam for giving us the opportunity to organize this webinar. And I thank all the delegates also to take time during this festive season to join this webinar. Thank you very much, doctors. Good night.
Good night to you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good night, sir.
Thank you, Raki.
Good night.
Madam. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Good
Priya.
night. Good night, Dr.